setup. But yeah, great to speak today. Today I'm talking about PreGame, next generation mobile accessibility remediation. If you came from Michael's talk, I'm from Test Party. I'm the co-founder and CTO, and we like to name things like in a very jovial way. So hence all the party themed names. And this one's very focused on mobile accessibility. So I'm going to dive pretty deep into that domain specifically. I like to start with a little bit of fun stuff. So I pulled a fan-drawn image of Matt Damon in the next Odysseus movie. I'm personally really looking forward to this Nolan film, big Nolan fan in general. Um, I think that mobile accessibility is quite similar to me to how the Odyssey is in terms of its position in classics. I'm a big classics nerd. I'll mention that in my background a little bit later. But I think that a lot of parts of Odysseus's story kind of mirror the experience of the mobile accessibility journey because they have a lot of the same elements. And I want to juxtapose it to the Iliad, which is mostly about the Trojan War. It's more familiar to everyone, and I think that that's the positioning between mobile and web of kind of their relationship. Both very important, very famous, but one kind of overshadows the other by a lot and has a lot more tooling, a lot more support, a lot more conversation around it. And but we want to talk about the other one just as much. Now, the famous Odysseus story has a lot of key components. Odysseus is coming back from the Trojan War, and he's trying to make it back to Ithaca. Along the way, his ship wrecks, and he encounters a ton of different creatures, one of which are the Lotus Eaters. I think the Lotus Eaters are really interesting. Maybe if you don't know what the Lotus Eaters were basically this group of people that eating lotuses basically made them forget the amount of time that had passed, and they became very complacent, and Odysseus lost a lot of time, and a lot of his sailors got enticed by the lotus eaters to kind of enjoy the lotuses and not actually focus on the journey to return home. And so I think, so I included a couple small icons on the ground, which is actually where the lotuses were, and those are the icons of Android and iOS, namely to kind of call out the big platforms for kind of they've made large statements around accessibility and guarantees and how much they're going to take care of it for you that a lot of developers can easily fall into a false sense of complacency because of how much Big Brother Apple wants to take care of their whole platform, and rather than give you the tools or give you the capability to do it yourself. And so I think that's a very apt analogy from this journey that Odysseus took as well. In addition, Odysseus also ran into Polyphemus, which is a cyclops, and he was in a cave, and he was trying to navigate this very dangerous situation, but also unclear situation. And I think this is particularly apt also for mobile accessibility because of the limited amounts of developer information that you can extract when you're working with a mobile app. It often feels like you're working with a subset of the information rather than the whole picture, which web developers never have a problem with in terms of the tools have matured so much more and versus like a guess and check motion that mobile developers often experience. And so that's another one of the tribulations that Odysseus had to overcome in order to make his journey finally back to Ithaca. And so I finally put here when Odysseus lands back on shore and he's completed his journey. I think that that's what we're trying to get to, is overcoming all of these difficulties that exist uniquely to the mobile world and get us to a testing and remediation state that matches more closely to web, like in the Iliad, where you had tons of heroes, tons of resources, tons of solutions for all your problems. And that's just the current state. So moving away from my little story, I wanted to say a little bit about who I am and why uniquely we have something here to talk about for mobile. I studied economics, computer science, and Latin at Princeton, and you can see a lot of parts of that flowing through the way I approach this problem specifically. It's a blend of technology and humanities and a bit of Latin, which I'm trying to prove to people still has a lot of use cases. I used to work as an iOS engineer at Twitch, so I actually have a lot of firsthand experience in mobile. I worked there right after graduating about 2 years ago, and they were in the midst of a lawsuit, so I was kind of an accessibility lawsuit. And so I had very firsthand experience looking at a very complicated mobile application, primarily only on the iOS side, but dealing with things that are live streaming. Like it's an app that really has the run of the gambit of every sort of accessibility issue and just user feature possible. Finally, I'm the founder and CTO of Test Party. We started this company specifically to kind of address some of the software level issues that we feel like are still not there. And so I'm really excited to show you kind of some of the approaches that we found are very innovative for remediation and testing. Now, I have this table of contents here just to talk a bit more about mobile accessibility and some of the issues within them. And then I want to show some screenshots of just a new imagined workflow for mobile accessibility testing and remediation. And I want to talk about how it fixes things that I wish I had when I was an iOS engineer, purely on the job, and then just some more broad tactical advice for how I want to see the broader community be able to spread its wings and engage and change things for the better. And then I'm going to leave quite a bit of time for Q&A. I know we're also the block right before lunch, so I don't think it hurts to end a little early either, so that people can, I know I'm very hungry, so you'll notice me speaking a lot faster than probably I usually do. So the present. I wanted to ask the crowd as a poll question of if anyone knows off the top of their head or just wants to take a stab at what % of iOS users use the feature called larger text, which is just any sort of magnification of the text on their phone. Yeah, a percentage. Okay.
Yeah, I feel like you gotta knock out a whole lot of people that don't even know it's there.
Yeah, so I thought you would guess a lot lower, but so the real answer is 20%, and I think that ultimately is still a huge number, and I think it's relative to anyone who's studied the stats around low vision, actually fully blind, it's significantly higher than all of those statistics combined, in the sense that a lot of users that just simply have a preference or have even just some level of prescription, they're looking for larger text on iOS and all these mobile apps. And I think one of the major issues that breaks a lot of apps is reflow and magnification on mobile apps because of the smaller screen size. Like on web, you get the benefit of, you know, having these large 1080 by 1920. You get large desktops. You just have so much real estate that you can afford to, you know, spread things out, and you don't really have to worry about layout sometimes. But on mobile, that problem is so acute, and especially with a little bit of zoom or magnification, you instantly get to a breaking screen size where things are hidden or things are overlapping. And so I think that obviously no one in this room, I I don't need to prove to anyone in this room that it's important, but I think for the layman, this is a statistic that still shocks most people. And even when I look over the shoulder of anyone on a subway, I often see people with zoomed in text. And I think that that's something that really shows why it's really important. And it shows kind of I know in like the kind of theory around universal design and principles is how making something more accessible helps everyone, right? Like the curb cuts and all those kind of things. I think that mobile accessibility has that built into its nature because mobile phones are more prevalent than computers still. And so the usage is so high that any benefit that's enjoyed from accessibility is largely transferable to the general population. Now, there is a survey that I wanted to talk about, which is from the American Federation for the Blind. It was from 2023, and it looked at access barriers in mobile apps. And so there are not that many studies out there that are specifically conducted on mobile apps. So I think this one is quite a nice one for it breaks it down by the function of mobile apps. And you can see that a lot of them are really core to, you know, our existence as you know, our day-to-day, from shopping to meeting a partner to trying to find jobs to, you know, our finances. So many really crucial parts, not that those don't exist on the web, but I think a lot of people perform those actions on mobile. And you'll see that there are like the statistics for occasional to frequent here are defined as occasional as someone who encounters a problem with accessibility on it 50% or less of the time, and then frequent is more than 50% of the time. The statistics show that most of the time people encounter a problem. Like even though we're in the double digits of no issues for certain categories, it's still nothing to be super happy about, right? I think that no one's happy. It's not a passing grade by any means. No, even though 20% or 30% have no issues, and it perhaps is more due to the fact that those people are not utilizing it to a point where it eventually encounters an issue.
Do you think maybe too, they just get used to using the same apps? People use the same apps over and over again. And so then I'm not sure how they got these numbers, but I'm wondering if that's some of it too, right? Like if you use HEB to order your groceries all the time, then you know how to use that and you're not going to have issues because you already learned it.
Right. That's definitely a valid theory. This study, I don't think revealed like which apps people used or like to what frequency they like changed apps. They did compare like kind of the same experience. They asked these respondents to like use the same experience across web and mobile and like see if they have more frequent issues or less. It was kind of I don't show this table for web, but it was like it was kind of indeterminate, even though it was like about the same in terms of like raw percentages of frequent versus occasional, but there wasn't like a large revelation of like, oh, these websites specifically neglected mobile or specifically neglected web. But yeah, I think your theory is totally like a plausible explanation. Also, yeah, feel free to interrupt and ask questions in the middle. By no means is this like as Michael said in his talk as well, I don't want this to be just purely a lecture. I hated lectures in college. I fell asleep during them a lot, so feel free to interrupt.
Are you going to mention the trend that I noticed?
What's the trend that you're noticing?
That banking and finance have been under litigation for the longest of an industry, so they have the less frequent problems, at least the amount of frequent problems.
Yeah, so I think like I think another one that's not on here that I'm sure would probably have the same effect is something like healthcare or like in health insurance, for example, I think has been litigated a lot and also has just the widest user base to kind of need access for. So yeah, that's a great observation. I think unfortunately that litigation is a strong driving force still for making sure.
Regulation.
Right. That's true. Yeah, that's true. So yeah, I'm gonna move on from this. Um, I think of like 4 big problems that I alluded to during my Odysseus story, but I want to dive a little deeper into, and curious your thoughts on each topic. Um, the first question is kind of where is MCAG? I coined this silly term because obviously a lot of people here know WCAG. I think MCAG is, I think that there is an argument to be made for having a superset of rules that are applied to mobile because first of all, on principle, I just think that vague rules create vague solutions. And that's one of my contentions with WCAG as well, in terms of if we want to enforce a really consistent standard, although many things are contextual driven, I think that having a much more clear set of rules that right? Like one day I think that accessibility, like security, wants to be able to be audited by third parties in a really, really standardized way. And in order to hand that to the American Society of CPA, the certified professionals, you have to have a very clear rule set. There cannot be sort of gray areas of accounting in order for that to happen. And I think that in mobile, we're seeing that even more so than web because there isn't this standard. And while a lot of the rules like, color contrast, like every single WCAG rule can have its mobile equivalent, I think there are things that are uniquely mobile that need to be like more well defined. We're pretty close with the CVS Health team, and they've recently, or not like 6 months ago, released like a pretty good set of techniques around specific types of UI elements that are, very mobile driven, that are whether it's for sheets or accordions that are specific, like bottom sheets that are pull upable from mobile, push notifications, things that UI patterns that you just don't see as much on web, how you should best make them accessible. And also, I think for WCAG, there are, for the rules that are well defined, there are actually good pass and fail examples, right? Like actual code snippets that show, these are the 4 ways that a form input label can be properly done. You can use these attributes, or you can use ARIA label, you can use an explicit label, you can use ARIA label by. That doesn't exist for every single platform on mobile. That it leaves so much gray area for how you're supposed to do things. So that's my number one. That's the number one gripe. The number 2 one, actually, I'll pause there for MCAG. I know that are there any people who are interested in commenting or questioning?
I actually have a comment and then I had a question. So I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with like Section 508 Trusted Tester. What they took WCAG essentially, and they just updated it to 2.2 Trusted Tester 5.1.3, and they did add some more parameters to it, and so it is a little bit stricter. So like pause, stop, hide for WCAG, you just have to have a mechanism, whereas like Trusted Tester, the mechanism has to be within the first 3 interactive elements. So if you're looking for like hard and fast rules, like you're making them for, I work for Fed agencies. And so a lot of times we'll like combine our own testing stuff. I think it's really handy. The other part of that is WCAG did just release a mobile, or W3C just did release some mobile guidelines. Have you had a chance to look through those, and what is your impression of them?
Yeah, so we're aware of like the working group that's like trying to define better mobile standards. I haven't gotten a chance to review the most recently released one. We had a conversation at CSUN with a couple people that were on part of that committee, and yeah, we're trying to. I think that's the right direction, and we want to be pretty actively involved with that process. Yeah. Any other questions, comments on MCAG? I will continue from here. For the number 2 part that I think is making mobile accessibility really challenged is the lack of automation. So the setup already, putting aside accessibility, automation testing and stuff for mobile is extremely siloed into the platforms that they exist in. And they're very, very difficult to set up. I think that maybe some of you guys have heard of these kind of frameworks that web has, which are mostly automated browsers, Playwright, Puppeteer. A lot of developers write tests for these automated browsers, and that's what allows you to really get the dynamic content, move beyond static analysis, and actually see what's on the page. And these tools are really mature. Like they can give you full manipulation of a browser as if you're a real user. You can input text, you can go through multiple screens, you can capture the screen. Everything under the sun pretty much you can do with this. And that's why web accessibility tools like Axe Core and everything that inject source code into browsers, that's why those tools have been able to be developed, is because of these foundational parts to the web. Now, mobile, the most popular tool for automation is called Appium. It's if anyone here has used it for testing, it's very difficult to set up, has like virtually no good like real API. It's very local driven. You would really struggle to deploy this into like some sort of continuous integration check. And let's not even get into the fact that continuous integration checks for setting up emulators and all of that is like still completely the Wild West. Like I wouldn't expect any engineering team to have that really figured out until they're very, very mature. At Twitch, we did have that, but it was kind of expert domain knowledge that was limited, that was set up once and never learned again. And so most companies that are much smaller do not have the resources to set up mobile automation in a way that parallels to web. And maybe some of you guys saw OpenAI's Operator, which was, for those who haven't, it was a browser task tool that basically you can give it a prompt, find me a bunch of vacation rentals for the month of July and help me book it. And basically it would go through the browser and like execute series of tasks and complete your wish. Now, there's a very unique reason, and I think that it doesn't seem like they'll be releasing that on mobile anytime soon. And the biggest reason behind that is the lack of mobile automation infra. And so I think there needs to be a significant amount of investment into automating parts of the mobile testing process in order, not just for accessibility, but definitely in order to actually get accessibility to a point where we can actually use automation. That's my number 2 point. My third horseman for why mobile accessibility is hard right now is opaque element structure. So I'm a developer, so this is a very technical complaint. But for everyone, in terms of on a website, when I right click, I can use inspect element and I can look at just everything on the page. third-party loaded things I coded. I can see the entire bundled source code just like hanging out in the browser folders, and I can play around with it. I can even change it in real time. Like I can, and all of that flexibility, um, does not exist on mobile, and right now is kind of being proxied through a lot of different things. So I think my next slide I show, yeah, the concept of DOMs, with document object models, and accessibility trees are just entirely missing from mobile. Like there is no true, even in these automated browsers like Puppeteer and Playwright, they have a single endpoint that just says print out the accessibility snapshot, the accessibility tree. Now, it's obviously not always 100% accurate, but it is so helpful to be able to actually know which parts are being picked up in the DOM versus in mobile right now. The way that tools are working is that Apple provides like an accessibility inspector, and you can manually toggle that, and you can see some of the accessibility hints and labels, but there is no programmatic way, at least yet, that's widely available to extract that information programmatically and use that for your testing suite in an effective way. So I think I give a screenshot of the DOM and how useful, you can see even, right, like a lot of it is not just the structure, but you can even get access to the style information. In Puppeteer browsers, you can get access to the keyboard focus. Like you can actually tell what the active element is. Versus in Xcode, you get like this hierarchy. And it's visual. It's entirely not like API based. And so this is a massive barrier that we're trying to overcome so that you can actually write effective tests against mobile. Finally, it's platform limitations that are not just unique to the view itself. So mobile is interesting because it's not just native iOS and Android. You have a lot of developers that write React Native, Flutter. There's Maui as well, which is Microsoft's like multi-app .NET kind of mobile app thing. There's not this like, so there's two sides to that. The good part is that there are pretty much only 7 frameworks you can build mobile apps with. The bad part is that the cross-platform mobile apps kind of take already, I already said that Apple and Android kind of like give you a limited set of information, and then React Native and them give you an even filtered subset of that because they need to maximize compatibility. So they can't do a one-to-one binding between every single Apple property and then also get it in React Native. I'm sure they want to, but the reality is that's not the case. And these cross-platform tools are becoming very popular because who doesn't want to launch something on both Android and iOS first? Who has like double the amount of engineers to spend on maintaining both platforms? So this seems to be a trend that is unavoidable, as in terms of like, especially with AI code gen now, speed is becoming such a big metric for most engineering teams. And so there's a lot of talk out there of kind of popularizing multi-platform engineering versus sticking to Apple's Swift UI, which has like a dedicated IDE, like so many things that make it not compatible with your current engineering workflow, and rather it needs like a specialized talent. In addition, I think I mentioned for already what Apple and Google expose from the view hierarchy perspective, they also expose just a limited, restricted set of their APIs. And so that makes it really tricky to build effective tooling across like what they already have. For example, like we we know that Apple's main IDE is Xcode, and it would be really nice to have, even not just dynamic analysis, but just plain old linters inside of your Xcode to be able to catch kind of, very basic things of, you didn't use accessibility label, you didn't have accessibility hidden for certain things. You can't do that because the extension development that Xcode that Apple did was kind of mothballed 10 years ago. And so there is no extension kind of marketplace the same way that a VS Code kind of has, or even like IntelliJ or something like that. So these platforms have actively made it harder to really implement better tools. So those are the 4 things of just me complaining. But before I bring some optimism to the table, were there any questions about those 4 things? I know I took them at a theoretical level and at a technical level, so happy to answer any questions there. Okay, seeing none. Oh, there's one. Oh, so sorry.
You were talking about the linters and stuff. I know there's Swift lint. Are you more referencing that there's not a lot of other linters out there, like in other IDEs that others can develop and have?
That's exactly
Okay.
right. Yeah, there's no way to really develop a custom linter super easily. They don't give you, like, you can't make a side interface to Xcode, like, things right now, right? There's a lot of AI extensions for using a chatbot. You just cannot develop, you're not allowed to develop that for Xcode basically right now. But yeah, there's like the built-in Apple ones. Because Apple's whole philosophy is to lock you into the ecosystem, which has its benefits, I guess. Anyone else that I missed? I guess I didn't check the chat either.
I just had one thought that Apple also, like when you file bug reports, it goes into like a void, an Apple Feedback Assistant. You can't share bug reports like you can on the web. They're like open to everyone to see those bug reports.
Right. Yeah, and I think, like, I guess I didn't mention also open source, right? Like, I think that the amount of open source tools that you have access to on web is just staggering in terms of like what you can do if you want. Like these, actually, again, those 2 browser automation tools that I talked about, they're both open source. They're not just like opaque black boxes of like, oh, like I have no idea what's happening when I like open up a headless browser and can use it. They are fully open source. If you have a feature that you want to put in, it most likely can get merged in within like 2 to 3 weeks. So it's extremely flexible to the developer, and I think that mobile needs that too. Whereas Apple is beginning to open source some things. They open sourced their language compiler about a month ago or 2 months ago, which indicates a positive sign for what they're trying to do, because I think it means that they want people to be able to compile Swift outside of their IDE, which is a huge step forward. But we'll see how fast they go with that. All right, so I want to introduce PreGame, which is a new way of really thinking about mobile accessibility. It's very modern. It's really looking to not like take the best parts of web and imitate it on mobile. So what we have here is a screenshot of our kind of user interface this is in VS Code. So because Apple's IDE has made it so limiting, we've forced ourselves to take a very open IDE like VS Code and be able to run mobile apps inside of them, and basically take all of the commands that Apple nicely extracts away from you and be able to run a mobile app, whether it's React Native, whether it's native iOS, and fully be able to run it inside of an IDE like VS Code. Now, and there are a couple parts to this. So the first part is that we have full integration into the simulator, right? So that's the first step for most of the testing on mobile, is like, how do you establish a reliable connection to the simulator? And we've been able to achieve that through mimicking what they already do on within their native IDEs. The second part is really, how do we tackle navigation in mobile? In mobile, there's no such thing as a URL, right? You can't just go to localhost, like you can't just go to /hello and then there's a page there. It's not like web. It's a series of actions that takes a user to a certain screen. So that makes it so much trickier to test a page, because a page could be the 6 actions deep. And so in order to account for that, this new process basically allows a developer to use those actions. And here you see a mapping of, basically, this is still iOS focused, but a mapping of all of the primary actions that can be taken automatically, whether it's tapping on something, pressing something, scrolling on something, and stringing together all of these actions into an effective URL. Right? So like, let's say on my, on my Twitter, you should open the app and then you should click on my profile and then you should scroll one scroll. That would constitute like a view or a page. And so that's how you can determine what you're testing and get to that location before you run an accessibility scan. And because mobile, again, is very different from web, you have, all sorts of IDs and all sorts of, ways to locate an element. In Puppeteer or Playwright, you can just simply say click and then put a selector, and you can reliably think that they're gonna find that. We've mimicked that experience in terms of using selectors, but in this case, it's either the actual inner text of the element or it's an ID, which is usually related to the accessibility label. And then there are also relative selectors that allow you to kind of identify things that are in proximity to another element. This gives like the maximum flexibility so that you can like actually not just like put in the action, but select the right element to interact with. So from this, after you've put in all the steps, it's a one-time kind of process for a developer. It saves a page, which is a URL, and it creates a flow using a YAML format that our tool is able to ingest that kind of, walks through, click on this, scroll on this, and it can execute that via the simulator. Once that kind of page is reached, it stops and finally actually runs a suite of accessibility checks on all the visible elements of the screen. And our tool is able to kind of create this almost DOM-like structure out of the elements that are visible on the screen, which is exactly the problem that I was kind of complaining to you guys about for what web gets to have that mobile doesn't yet. And once that scan is run, it can actually perform the analysis and come back with results and advice for what to fix. And so I think on the next screen here, I show one of the sample results of just like in context, one of the checks that you're looking for on mobile. It's an image alt text check. It shows that the accessibility text was null out of there, and it looks at the simulator and takes a screenshot. Something like this is a test page. It draws a bounding box on the emulator, and you're able to like kind of very easily correlate what's there and what's not. The step that's not being shown that the web equivalent does have is like the relationship to the source code that created it. That's one of the most powerful things on web that I've still yet to see a very easy solution for mobile. So on web, we're able to basically tag every single element that gets rendered on the screen. And the reason that's allowed is because in HTML or just the DOM in general, you're allowed to put in these custom attributes, so you can put many, many markers to identify them. But on mobile, that's unfortunately right now not allowed. So there's very little recourse for identifying, okay, this this one is specifically from this line of code versus kind of just its visual information on the screen. So we're able to obviously see that it's, you know, this position and it draws a very accurate bounding box, but it's the final step for us would be to take that visual information in that bounding box and to relate it back to the exact file that it came from, you know, that generated, you know, that maybe rendered an image view.
You said it created a DOM-like structure. Are you able to view that DOM-like structure as well, or you only get that information on possible failures?
No, we're able to view that DOM-like structure in general. Yeah. So it takes like it's still very, very messy in terms of like Apple has, like just in general, mobile apps are structured so differently from a website. A website, you have the elements and they're mostly occupying like the space that you expect. On mobile apps, it's a series of screens stacked like vertically on top of each other and then like relative positioning across them. So there's like a ton of useless information that you have to like kind of like ignore basically because it's structured in a three-dimensional way rather than two-dimensionally. Question in the
So you talked about the mapping that the developer does, that one-time mapping that effectively creates a location in the mobile application, and then you go there and you scan. Is your scanning capability scanning along the way, meaning we start at A, go to B, go to C, go to D, and we scan each step, or does it go right to D and we're scanning D?
Right now it goes right to D. We don't pause along the way, but we could easily pause along the way as well. Yes, that's exactly right. We call it a flow in and of itself as well. Yeah.
So this tool is more of like helping the functional mobile testing or accessibility also, because when we talk about mobile testing in accessibility world, we usually go with actual device and do testing there. But this is more of like testing on simulator. So how many percentage of errors are you like saying that will be found with this approach?
Versus actual device. Okay. So yeah, funnily enough, this can be run on device as well. It is not just simulator. It's just for the ease of explanation that it's on simulator. There are some discrepancies between simulator and physical device for sure, but I think that the majority of people will want to run on both because physical device I think is still like going to be less convenient for certain people. It's going to be a final check versus the simulator is going to be the more frequent check that people can run during development, during like iterations of their feature, rather than I think it's similar to QA, right? In terms of like most mobile developers are probably just checking their work on simulator, and then pre-release there's a QA cycle that's running on a compatibility matrix of physical devices. I think that yeah, we'll get to we do support both, but I think that the accessibility testing will probably be done on both as well. Yeah. Okay. So what we currently address is kind of very in line with our friends at CVS Health in terms of a UI-based approach. In terms of there are many popular types of elements. It's kind of similar to, I think WCAG is also, it's separated out by function, but it certainly has a pretty good mapping to the core semantic HTML that exists out there. Things like input fields, like text, like images, and then there are the more kind of unique ones where like WCAG doesn't, it talks about keyboard focus, but it doesn't have a section on pop-ups or modals because those are ultimately like specialty features for web. Whereas those, I would say if I were designing MCAG, pop-ups, modals, like bottom sheets, drawers, those are integral to the mobile experience. And so they need to have like kind of dedicated standards and evaluation techniques specific to those types of UI elements, almost like validating a design system in a way. And a lot of, I think, designers and design system engineers view kind of accessibility in a design system-y kind of way, less so of a standards versus like I need to check component by component and make sure that they adhere to the same standards, but there are very like rigid rules for each component. So CVS Health, they produced a repository. I really encourage you to go take a look. They have kind of live tactical examples for both SwiftUI, UIKit, Android Views, and Android Jetpack Compose. They have like pretty much, I think, 50 or 60 types of UI elements. We are nowhere near covering all of those, and a lot of those are extremely difficult to cover in a purely deterministic way, would definitely kind of require a computer vision based or AI based analysis of the screen as well as the DOM-like information paired together in order to have a full evaluation context. But the ones that you see up here are definitely the ones that kind of they require the least amount of information to come to at least a baseline assessment of whether there's a label, whether there's, most of these are currently stopped at the label stage, and then there's going to be more about like the focus and the keyboard navigability of it that comes later. The most interesting part is I complained about platforms, and so I think that mobile is in an interesting space where the tool also has to support all major platforms. So that's kind of part of the technical challenge that we've been able to overcome is like how to evaluate these on various projects that have completely different setups, and we've been able to validate them on pretty much these 5 that we deem to be the most popular. And I think that support will continue and will be really fruitful for accessibility because in solving each of them like across comparing and solving across each of these platforms reveals like a standardized approach that potentially should be codified into like this is how a date picker, for example, on native Swift has its own graph, like is uniquely identifiable by Apple as a date picker, versus in React Native, a date picker, the most popular date picker package is a cobbled up version of like various different views and doesn't have a direct mapping to SwiftUI, to the Apple native versions. And so perhaps there is something to be done there at the root level of React Native's infrastructure to enforce that you should be using Apple's version for certain things and like eliminating the customization a little more so that there can be better testing principles around those kind of complex UI elements. I do have some tactical advice, but I did want to pause because that's like I'm also happy to show a video. I just recorded a video of like the tool like fully in action. So I'm happy to kind of take a look at that, but also happy to take a question before that. I'll pull up the video as I'm talking.
Are you saying you ran your testing tool through the CVS open source project?
No, so we have a couple, like we took a subset of their repository and like because we don't support all of the rules yet. But yes, it is on top of their kind of demo repository. It's all open source.
Is that a good bad example?
Yes, it has the good and bad.
I'm the developer of that project. I don't know if you knew that,
sick.
but hi, I'm Paul. Nice to meet you.
That's amazing because you're.
But I was just wondering, if you tested the good and bad examples and, show the errors with your tool and all that. It sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, we've been using your repository extensively for testing. because we think it's a really, really good benchmark. So yeah, this is like a small video. This is specifically Swift UI. We scan and correct code, and then you'll see it kind of building the app for simulator. It takes a second. Let me speed it up a little. It launches the simulator, and basically what I didn't show in here is the steps that we already have. It's basically going to the text input field, and then it's like scrolling a bunch to go to the bad examples. So you see it here. Actually, let me go back and slow it down from when it. So it launches the app using automation. It performs like the navigation of the URL. So it scrolls past the good examples so that the bad examples start to show. And then it runs its scan. It takes a second, and then it compiles the results in the failed checks here, and it takes a screenshot, and you can see the bounding box highlighted for various different like bad example input text fields here. So that's kind of the in action version of it. And yeah, it's quite simple. We're still obviously like trying to push beyond just labels and like I think, but mobile is so nascent that at least it needs the baseline checks first. It needs its Axe Core equivalent before it can go and graduate to its like advanced analysis kind of version.
Excuse me, Jason. Do you have a list of the success criteria or rules that are actually?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the CVS rule set. I'm curious if you can talk about some of the other open source rule sets that you're looking at.
Oh yeah, so other than CVS, which we love the CVS team just in general. We've looked at kind of there's one from I think Verizon and also from Magenta Ally. I think yeah. T-Mobile, yeah. That we've definitely seen the page of like all the different UI elements and like the techniques and yeah, I think those are both really good resources that we've been benchmarking on. I think there needs to be more, and we hope to release more open source stuff to like to I think for both web and mobile, like a testing page, like the good example, bad example stuff, I think is so invaluable for developers to like have a good sense, like especially in the world of AI, as like benchmarks are kind of like, I think for accessibility, we're still in a space where benchmarks can be really accurate, and like versus like in AI, benchmarks are kind of getting corrupted because they're bleeding into the training data. Whereas here, like we can really prove like this actually solves this issue, this doesn't, and like there's and we're talking about a unified standard so that everyone's so that people aren't like saying different things and rather and making different claims. I think that's what a unified standard really helps with. Okay, I will move on to my final bit. Just some tactical advice that's somewhat related to mobile, somewhat just more broad. I think that in mobile and web both, I think that the expertise in engineering is like needs to kind of flow into a lot of the adjacent spaces. I think that we've met so many accessibility champions that are either you know decision makers or just they're the only engineer or the only QA person that like kind of is passionate about accessibility. And I think that, and I'm so glad that everyone in this room, you know, recognizes most of the terms that I talk about. But honestly, I really dream of talking to a room that is mostly unfamiliar with the concepts. And I think that it's on all of us to like bring those people to that room, because it's great talking to experts. And I think, but I want to mint a lot more experts, novices, amateurs, just so many more. And I think that part is really important to engage across the entire org. And then the second one is really to experiment. I think that I've seen a lot of like parts of businesses adopt new tools like at a really rapid pace these days, mainly for excitement for AI. I don't think like we are going to like accessibility is going to have its real AI tooling moment, but I also think that the experimentation phase of accessibility is really exciting, not just because there's like not that many tools, but also because I think accessibility tooling is one of the backbones for a lot of other developer tooling. You'd be shocked by how many of my AI like startup founder friends ask me about like accessibility APIs because they've like started to try to automate certain things in a browser, and they're like, oh, this is all like related to accessibility, really. Like that, like I couldn't like complete this thing in healthcare or finance or something because the site was so inaccessible that the little bot that I was or agent that I was trying to code, it just couldn't reach it. It like couldn't click on it. It couldn't do anything with it. So the accessibility tooling that's going to be developed in the next couple of years, I think, is going to dramatically improve just all of the tooling around automation and will be super, super useful. And I think in order for that to happen in the accessibility world first, a lot of experiments have to be run, and a lot of it will be successful, and a lot of it will be learning. And then the third part is like a focus on remediation. I think that this has always been like a core part of how we've approached this problem is like, I know for mobile, like right now, we're still kind of bridging the gap between associating elements and source code. We've already achieved that on web, but I'm here to talk about mobile. I think that that's kind of a North Star of like, I think a lot of people, whether they're passionate about the space or not, that they're very frustrated with not fixing the problem, but just documenting it and just like repeatedly doing manual things to document it. And those things either get pushed out of priority. I think that a lot of people would jump at the notion of actually fixing these problems. And the only way to get there is to have a remediation first approach of once we, like, for example, for our labels, the second that we actually can fully accurately identify that the elements are not labeled properly, our instant thinking is, okay, how can we give the developer a first shot solution at what this label should be based on all the information that's on the screen, in the code? How can we combine that into something that immediately gives a remediation solution rather than, hey, you have a problem. Hey, you have 15 problems. No one wants to be like kind of just like inundated with like a high volume with no sign of optimism. And so I think that there's a lot to be done there, both in mobile and in web, but we're seeing a lot of it in mobile because like people don't even want to really approach the problem when there is no like remediation in mind.
Android has linting where it can just check for like missing image alt text or missing form accessible name, and it'll have like a little button like fix this and kind of drop in that alt text. And like Xcode has nothing like that, or not built in. Maybe
Yeah.
there's some other third party thing, but I don't, they need to make that as easy as you can, and just as soon as you find it, fix it. That would be really nice.
Yep, agreed. And I think like, and the big part that we're also trying to do is remediate. I think that most people are most receptive to learning and being educated when they're also kind of being given a solution. And that's why we bake in that very like hyper specific, like little bit of like education in the middle of giving you the solution, because that's, I think it's called just-in-time learning, right? Like when someone's feeling a problem, someone, their tire's flat is exactly the moment that they're actually quite willing to learn how to fix a flat tire. But if you tell them that it's not going to work and it's that they're not actually learning anything that's going to be like broadly applicable to like their like to fixing it, they're way more kind of stubborn and rejecting of that approach. So yeah, those are the core things. I definitely ended quite a bit earlier, talked a little too fast for lunch. Yeah, would love to stay in touch. I think that I'm sure a lot of you guys are working on mobile accessibility, and would also, after this, happy to share like a version of the tool that you're welcome to try around with. Any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, first, thanks for presenting. This is like awesome, and I have questions on like how does your tool like work on the Flutter accessibility? So does it work with the widget inspector in Flutter to like to identify the accessibility problem? Because
Yeah,
you
so
mentioned about
oh,
the
sorry.
like linking the issue with the source code. So I'm just curious.
Yeah, so for Flutter, I mean, it's a very similar approach in terms of how we compile the app, and like we don't like it's still through the emulator and through like kind of reconstructing the DOM object. Like we basically take a universal technique across all the platforms. Right now, I think for each platform, we're trying to get to a place where we can suggest code and like actually inside of your file. And I think for Flutter and Dart files, we're universally, I think I alluded to, like we're trying to create a mapping between the source code and the element on the screen. And we've found a very reliable technique for web, and we're trying to emulate that for these mobile platforms as well. For React Native, for example, they have like a thing called a test ID, which is something that like kind of uniquely allows you to inject certain things and identify things on the screen. I think like I don't know the exact equivalent in Flutter, but I think that that's where we would be able to create the most helpful suggestion, because it would actually tell you the line and column number of the exact element that's also being bounding boxed on the screen.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. I think that's all the questions. Anything online? I don't think so, or I can't see the chat. Yeah, I can't see the chat. Yeah, so the physical device question as well. For physical devices, right now we've only validated it on Android. The iOS physical device automation is very tricky, and so I think that that one's still very experimental and not ready yet. But the Android physical device one is quite ready. And luckily, there technically are more Android users than iPhone users, despite the US's personal preference. Okay, I think that is all. Thank you guys so much. Yeah.